Good evening, everybody. We're going to be running through 14, 15, and 16 chapters of Genesis tonight. We're going to be, so everybody get on your running shoes. We'll go through a lot of ground tonight, but we want to do that to cover our story of redemption and to see where it's gotten us to this point. We are trying to track down the entire story of redemption, and it will go through the whole Bible, but we won't hit every topic and every subject, but there will be a lot of stuff in this that we're going to cover. We are now tonight to the 14th chapter of the book of Genesis. You know, God goes to a lot of trouble to redeem us. We've said that over and again. That's been sort of the running theme that we've picked up through this study. God went to a lot of trouble, man. The flood, the cross. I mean, we can just we can stop right there. But he went to a lot of trouble. Tonight he sees the need to tell us the story of Lot and the trouble he finds. Somehow the Holy Spirit felt like it was important that we follow Lot in this story, and so we're going to follow him, and we're going to see a man that has made some mistakes. He's made some bad choices, but God still loves him. You know, one can make the logical conclusion that when we allow our carnal nature to guide our decisions, we will often get ourselves in difficult circumstances. When we follow our eyes, we follow our carnality, our natural human nature, and make decisions based on common sense versus Holy Spirit leadership, we will get ourselves in some dire straits. But Abram used his spiritual eyes to guide him, and he followed the Lord, and he looked with the inner voice, and heard the inner voice, and looked to the inner man, and followed him. But you know what? I want you to notice this. Even though Abram followed God and was the man of faith, the father of three religions, as it were, still yet he had trouble from time to time. So I guess what we can pick up from this is that bad stuff happens to good people as well as not bad people, but people that make the bad choices. It happens to us all. And so don't be angry at God if you've been doing the best you could and still sometimes things will fall into your life you'd rather not have happened, not have seen come in. Trust Him, He knows what He's doing. So it's hard to avoid trouble no matter what. So tonight we're going to follow what I think is a great plot for a movie. I don't know why somebody hasn't found this and made a blockbuster movie out of it and made billions of dollars on it. So if you are a movie producer here tonight, I want to pitch this to you. I think this will be good. I do want a little cut, however. No, of course not. Tonight we're going to find our hero caught in a war and another real hero coming to his rescue. I don't know what to call him. Lot is not a hero, but he is somewhat of a protagonist in this story. He is somewhat of a person that plays a role that we would put in a starring role. But then we're going to watch the man on the cavalry with the white horses arrive, and that's Abram, and he's going to come and rescue Lot from this story tonight. So there are 9 city-states. Now I don't know how to describe these to you. They weren't kingdoms, even though the Bible calls them kingdoms. So you know what a kingdom is, don't you? I mean, that means there's a king over people, and it doesn't necessarily have to be large. I want you to think of them more as city-states. Imagine that there was a king over Dadeville, and there was a king over Miller, and there was a king over Republic, and we're not that far out of bounds here when we talk about it. They may have been a little bigger, but not a lot, and so these were what we're talking about when we talk about these kings. They come to battle down in the Dead Sea. They come down there to battle. There's 4 against 5. Four kings come against 5 kings. In other words, the 4 have gone together. They've created a combined army. And then the 5 kings that are attacking them, they've developed a combined army. Guess what? The war's over. Taxes. I know that shocked you. They didn't want to pay their tribute. The kings in the Sodom in the valley there, they didn't want to pay, and so they withheld, etc. And war started out. So we find ourselves, we catch up with Lot, And he's in the middle of this war, this small war, or whatever you want to call it. And as I said, there's 9 local city-states engaged in a dispute, and hostilities break out. The group that Lot was with lost. In the battle, they lost. So Lot, he wasn't actually involved in it. He just got caught up in it. But the people he got caught up with, the Sodomites and some of those others around that area, around Sodom and Gomorrah, they lost in this battle. And they were taken away. Lot lost all of his possessions, everything he brought. You might remember where he got rich? In Egypt. Lot got rich in Egypt when he was down there with Abram. And when they ran him out, they came out with all kinds of wealth. And Abram came out with all kinds of wealth. Well, now they lose all of that in this battle. And Lot loses himself, his family, and his possessions. And so that's where we find ourselves. Now, we meet Abram. Now, when I call him Abram, don't get lost if you've not been with me. This is Abraham before they add the H. All right? Now, Sunday we're going to talk about how the H, where that fits in. You already know. It's the breath of God. It's when he met God and when they form a covenant together. And God adds the H to his name, indicating the of God, the breath of God. Abraham, okay? But at this point, it's Abram. And so when I say that, don't get lost in what we're doing. Well, what kind of power and authority and resources did Abram have? Well, we don't know. But he had a personal army of 318 soldiers. So it wasn't some measly little guy that rode in on a camel. I mean, he was a wealthy landowner, and out of his own people, his own slaves, not slaves so much, yeah, slaves too, but servants and whatever, he pulled together 318. Now, isn't that unique? Isn't that crazy? After all these years, we know exactly the number of men in his army. To me, that verifies a lot of the Bible as we read it, as we study it. If they were just making up a story, would you make up a story with 318 soldiers, right? No, I'd have said 325 or 50 or 3,000. I don't know, depending on how much you want to stretch the story, but he said 318. So Abram takes out after the 5 kings that whipped up on the 4 kings, and he rescues Lot. He finds Lot hiding with them. He rescues them. In other words, Abram's 318 soldiers whip up on the 5 kings. Are you with me so far? And they rescue Lot, all of his possessions, all of the king of Sodom, the king of Tyre, the king of Gomorrah. All of those kings were rescued, and they got all their stuff back. But Abram did that with his personal army. Now, I'm kind of going fast through that because it is a great story. Again, I'd like to see somebody write a movie on that. Because you could sure make a lot to do with that. If you could write a plot to it. It's got a pretty plot already, but I mean, write the action and all. Now, I want to introduce you to a gentleman that is really, and I use this word a lot, so it won't make. He's just really weird, and it doesn't. This guy, I'm going to call it not weird, but strange. All right, we're going to introduce you to a guy, and his name is Melchizedek. Where in the world does Melchizedek come from? Where does he go? Who is he? This guy is really obscure. I mean, is enigmatic. He comes from nowhere. He goes to nowhere. And let me read to you verse 18. That we're going to be in chapter 14, verse 18. And I want to read you these words. Then Melchizedek, king of Salem. All right? You know what Salem means? Shalom. That's the shalom. What does shalom mean? Peace. The king of peace. Anybody getting any bells going off so far? Anybody getting any goosebumps? Anything happening? Melchizedek is the king of peace. I'm getting it. Okay, let's keep going. He brought him bread and wine. Who brings bread and wine? Where does that come from? What happens at the Lord's Supper? Okay, is anybody going here with me? All right, let me start over. Then Melchizedek, king of Salem, king of peace, brought out bread and wine. He was the priest of God Most High. And he blessed Abram, saying, Blessed be Abram by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth. And praise be to God Most High, who delivered your enemies into your hand. Then Abram gave him a tithe, a tenth of everything he had. All right, now let's kind of run back and let's put this all together. And I want to bring some things to you. And I want you to try to tell me who this is. Who is this Melchizedek? First of all, he's the king of Shalom, the king of peace. Don't we hear about another king, another prince of peace coming in the end of the world, at the end of time? His name is King of Kings, Lord of Lords, Prince of Peace. All right? So he has no lineage listed in the narrative. No father, no mother. We don't know anything about him. We don't know where he came from. We don't know where he goes. He's just appears on the scene from nowhere. He's not mentioned again in the Old Testament. There's some references to him in the New Testament, but there's no further mention of him in the Old Testament. He brings bread and wine. He offers communion, as it were. He was a priest of Most High God, El Elyon, the creator of heaven and earth. In other words, he's the priest of God, not just a local God, but the God that made the heavens and the earth. He blessed Abram in the name of the Most High God, the creator of heaven and earth. He credited the Most High God with Abram's success. In other words, he said, Abram, I know why you won, because God was with you and he blessed you. And then Abraham tithed to him. He gave him a tenth of everything that he owned. Folks, I don't know about you, but this is really beginning to puzzle me and cause me questions. Let me read you John chapter 8, verse 57. See if this will add any light to your confusion. John 8, 57. So the Jews said to him, now this was the Jews talking to Jesus. These are the Pharisees. Jesus had been saying some things to them that was a little hard for them to understand or accept. And so they say, so the Jews said to him, you're not yet 50 years old. You're not 50 years old. And yet, you've seen Abraham? Jesus said to them, truly, truly, I say to you, before Abraham was born, I am. I think I'm beginning to figure out who this is. I believe, my dear friends, that we are seeing here a pre-Bethlehem experience of Jesus Christ. I believe this is Jesus before he was born in Bethlehem. I think he came onto this earth and showed up at this time. I could be wrong. It doesn't have to be right. It could be somebody else, but to me, it just blesses me to think, to know that my Lord always has been. And when he came in Bethlehem, you know, he had always been King of Kings. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God. In other words, Jesus was here from the very beginning. Well, let's keep going. Abraham refuses booty from the victory that his 318 men had claimed. He said, no, I'm not going to take anything from this war. I don't want anybody to ever say that Abram got wealthy over this war, or Abram was wealthy only because of what people have done. He said, I want to make sure that everybody knows that it's only God has blessed me. So he wouldn't take any booty from the war whatsoever. Now Genesis 15. In Genesis 15, God elaborates on the promise that he made to Abram. Now, if you have to, please remember what we're doing. We're trying to track the story of redemption. We're trying to see the twists and turns, the ups and downs of this marvelous panoramic story, this epic story of redemption, and where it has gone and what it's done. And I want you to notice now that through Abram, God makes this great covenant agreement. He forms an agreement with him. He cuts covenant, as it were, and we'll talk about that more even Sunday morning. Now let me show you what he says to him in chapter 15. He promises to be his shield and his great reward. Now, I'll not be reading each word of 14, 15, and 16 way too much, but you can go home and read it again. But I'm summarizing. He said to Abram, Abram, I am going to be your shield and your great reward. He says to him, Abram's voices his concern. He says to God, he said, now God, I know that you have said I'm going to have children, but I'm getting kind of long in the tooth. I'm getting kind of old here. And so what I'll do, God, I'm going to help you out. Has anybody in here ever felt like you need to help God out? Well, you just will rest. You don't, there's no good, it doesn't do any good to help God out. But Abraham thought he'd help poor God out. God was caught in a trick, in a trap here. Abram was getting old, and he promised him children, and he said, well, okay, here's what I'll do. I'll take my head servant, my chief of staff, Eleazar, and I'll make Eleazar my heir. And then God, through Eleazar, you can do everything you promised me that you'll do. And God says to Abraham, bless your heart, Abraham. Bless your little heart. You're trying hard, I know. But he said, Abram, Eleazar's not going to be your heir. You're going to have a son out of your own body. It'll be your seed and your DNA, your heritage will be, you're going to have a boy, and I'm going to bless him. Now, this isn't the last time Abram's going to help poor God out, right? You all are ahead of me, but we're going to see some of that as we go here. So God promises Abraham that his offspring, his very own offspring, will be so numerous you can't count them. And he says, Abram, if you want to know how many kids you're going to have, look up in the sky and count the stars. Can you count the stars? Can you? No. He said, well, that's how many kids you're going to have. That'll be your heritage. So in verse 6 it says, chapter 15:6, Abram believed the Lord, and he credited it to him as righteousness. My dear friends, if there's ever a verse in the Old Testament that is powerful, it's that one. That is the one red letter verse, I believe, in the entire book of Genesis. Because in that little verse of chapter 15, verse 6, we find the entire theology of the New Testament. We find everything about salvation we need to know. It tells us right there at that point that when God looks down at your life and at my life, and He sees faith in us, when He sees that we believe Him and we trust Him, He transposes our faith into salvation, into righteousness. That's how we get it. It's by faith. And God does the changing and the transition. Now God cuts covenant with Abram to assure him of his offspring and his success in the promised land. Interesting story. It's obscure. I honestly, every time I read it, I walk away scratching my head. I don't quite understand it. But they cut cattle in half, and they cut birds in half, and they cut this and that. And then Abram scares the crows off all day long. And you know, there's a lot more going on here than I know, okay? There's more in that I want to know, let's put it that way. But I haven't figured it all out yet. But then at night, as the evening begins to fall, he has a vision of a smoking pot. In other words, some kind of a fire-holding vessel passes through the middle of the cut-up animals. All right, and this is, through this whole thing, Abram understands that God is cutting covenant with him. And I think it links back to blood covenants back from the ancient world. How many of you ever had a blood brother? You cut your hand and you held your hands together. And all of us kids, you know, we all had blood brothers. And that's that ancient ritual of bleeding together that this kind of hinges on and leans and points to. It's a cutting covenant of agreement, of blood. And it goes way, way back beyond even our prehistory to where we don't understand. But anyway, that all happened, and then God made this great covenant with Abram at that point. Then God, or the great I Am, He tells Abram in chapter 15, He says, Abram, something's going to happen to your children down the road. For 400 years, they're going to be in captivity in Egypt. He tells him that right up front. He says, someday your children are going to go to Egypt, and they're going to be down there as slaves for 400 years. He says, after it's over, I'm going to bring them home. We're going to come back to this promised land. We're going to come back here. And then he says, Abram, here's what I want to tell you right now. I'm going to bless every nation that blesses your children, and I'm going to curse every nation that curses your children. He said, and that is in perpetuity. That blessing and that cursing still exists today. It has never gone out of force. It is still true today. Every nation that blesses Israel will be blessed. And any nation that curses Israel will be cursed. Folks, write it down. It's going to be true as long as God lives. Chapter 16. Time passes. Time goes by. Abram's got all these promises. He's seen all these things. But guess what? No kids. Sarah is barren. No children. Verse 3 says that 10 years passed in chapter 16 from when this all happened, the cutting of covenant and all. Now 10 years have gone by and still no children. I know they must have been frustrated. I know they must have been weary, and their faith must have flagged, and many times they must have given up. How many of you, like me, have wearied waiting on things that God promised me to happen? God said it happened, and I just didn't see it in my timing. I didn't understand. I wanted it to happen quicker. And by the way, God has a time schedule, and He usually doesn't take my advice on when to pull the trigger on things. He seems to want to do it His way. Okay, so time passes. 3 years, 10 years, I'm sorry, goes by. Sarah, remember good-looking Sarah? Sarah comes up to Abram. She said, okay, Abram, it's been a long time. Nothing's happening. We're not having children. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to bring Hagar into you, and I want you to sleep with her for a while, and I want you to have a child with Hagar. Who's Hagar? She's an Egyptian slave, servant. I don't know whether slaves or servants. I suppose it's a thin line. But nevertheless, she said to Abraham, I want you to have sex with Hagar. I don't notice anywhere in here where he argued with her. Did anybody see anything in there? No. I'm not going to do it. No. I don't find it in my Bible. He's just silent. I said, okay. Yeah, I'll just, whatever you say, honey, I'm going to do what you say. But anyway, he began to spend the nights with Hagar, and she became pregnant just almost immediately. And not only did she become pregnant immediately, but the trouble in the family started immediately. Can you imagine that? Sometimes I worry about our poor Mormon brothers. What would you do with 2 wives? Or 10. Poor little fellas. That's just not wise, I don't think at all. Not only being against the... Anyway, that just ain't right at all. Anyway. So, trouble starts, and they are... Can you imagine Sarah and Hagar, what they're saying to each other? Oh, cat fights, claws are coming out, curtains are being ripped, and things are being thrown, and now if you think that's bad, imagine what Abram's going through. He's in the middle of this, caught right in the middle. Well, these kind of decisions hardly ever turn out good, friends. They just don't turn out good. So here we are. So finally, Hagar has had a dose. She says, I am done with this deal. By the way, Ishmael's born now, and we'll talk more about him later. But she says, I've had enough, I'm leaving. And so Hagar and Ishmael take off into the desert. They just leave. They didn't care about what they were going to do, how they were going to eat, whatever. They just have had it, didn't matter, we're out of here. And as they're running away, an angel appears to Hagar, stops her in the desert, and speaks to her and says, okay, I know it's tough. All right, now I'm paraphrasing, but you can imagine it went something like this. She said, I know it's tough, Hagar. I know it's hard. This thing's a mess. But I want you to go back into that mess. I want you to live. And I want you to tough it out. And I want you to have that baby. And I'm going to bless you, and I'm going to bless that baby. And I'm on all these promises that I've been made to Abram, I'm going to make to you. This boy that you're going to have is going to be, his children are going to be numerous. And they're going to also be like Abram's children. There'll be a lot of them. You can't count them. But I want you to call the boy Ishmael, which means God hears. That's what that word means. God hears. God hears. What did God hear? God heard her trouble. God heard all the things that were going on. He heard it. He wasn't absent. He was aware. He cared. He was there. And she said, I want you to call him Ishmael. And oh, by the way, he's going to be a wild ass of a man. Anybody raised any of those kids like that? Well, that's what God said. He's going to be a wild ass right here. And read the Bible. That's what he called him. And he's going to fight against everybody he's around. He's going to be against everybody. Who am I talking about here? Can you say Saudi Arabia? The Sauds of Saudi Arabia? These are all direct descendants from Ishmael. All right, that's who we're talking about today. And others, but the direct descendants of Ishmael are the Saudi Arabians. He will live in hostility. And then it closes that chapter, chapter 16, with these words. Abram is now 86 years old. He's now 86 years old. And I thought that was a curious way to close that chapter. All right, now I'm ready to preach the sermon. God wants us to live by faith and trust Him. The problem is, living by faith is very difficult. He wants us to live by faith, but He knows it's a hard thing to do. And the only people that think living by faith is easy are those who haven't tried it. Because living by faith is very hard. And you never get good at it. You never get perfect at it. It's, I always thought, when I get to be in my late 60s and I get older, why, my faith will be so strong and everything, I'll never have a doubt again. It's not working that way, folks. I don't know, I don't want to tell you, I think I'm closer to the Lord than ever before, but at the same time, age is not adding what I thought it would. And I've been reading others that they thought that as they lived longer, it'd be easier to have faith. But I'm finding out that most of the people that I'm studying as they age, it didn't work out that way. It's a struggle all the way through. So, when we exercise our faith, please get this. When we exercise our faith, God translates it into salvation, redemption. When we live by faith, He makes it work better in our life. He works it out in our life. And not just in when I get to heaven pie in the sky salvation, but all the way through salvation. It's here and there. And so when we live by faith, we begin to step into that salvation and more and more. So God turns it into righteousness. So how can I become this person of faith? And so here is the sermon. How can I become a person of faith? How can I live by faith? Whether as a young person or as a middle-aged person or as an older person. How can I live by faith? Here we go. Number one. First of all, you need to meet Melchizedek. You got to meet Jesus. First thing off. That's how you're going to live by faith. You got to meet Him. You got to know Him. You got to have Him in your life. You have to confess your sin. You have to repent of your sin. You have to receive Him and believe in Him. You've got to meet Him. I'm going to call Him Melchizedek, but I'm really meaning Jesus. You got to meet Jesus if you're going to live by faith. Number two, you've got to come into a covenant relationship with Him. You've got to accept the covenant He wants to cut with you. You need to become His blood brother. He shed His blood for you. You need to accept that. You need to accept that into your life and accept the covenant. And I'll talk sometime later about a suzerain covenant and about how that He's the stronger party and you're the weaker party. We're getting into all that technical stuff. But the most important thing is He cuts a covenant with you. He does everything. All you have to do is believe it and accept it. That's where we go. Number three, learn not to trust your circumstances or what your eyes see. Trust only what God says. If you want to live by faith, meet Jesus, come into a covenant relationship with Him, and then walk by faith. Not trust your eyes, walk by faith. Now in covenant, our part is what? Obedience and faith. God's part is salvation. His reward is salvation. Our part is acceptance. So live by faith, reap the benefits of all that God has to give us as we live day by day, moment by moment, by faith. The just shall live by faith. Not by works. Not by works. Let's pray. Father.